Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here and welcome back to the railway. Today I'm reviewing a Bachmann steam loco from the United States. Today's engine is a World War I era engine, and I love British locos from World War I. I find them really interesting, so hopefully this one will be similar. The engine is this. It is the Bachmann USRA Mikado Light loco, the USRA being a pretty brief but very interesting chapter of American railroad history, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. Anyway, let's talk about how I got this loco. So this engine is actually available under Bachmann Europe, which means you can buy it from certain British retailers. However, I wouldn't recommend you do that because the prices are ridiculous. So Bachmann's RRP for this is £299.25, and I found this at one of our British retailers for £238.73. Well, that's bad news for British retailers because I found this at Train World for $159.99, which is about £129. So for me over here in the UK, it's actually much cheaper, even with shipping and import costs, to buy this in the United States and import it than it is to buy it from a British retailer. So a round of applause for Bachmann, well done there. I actually feel quite bad for any British retailers that have got this in stock because they're possibly going to have to discount them in order to get them to shift. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend buying this if you're in the UK from the UK. Get it from Train World, package it with a few other items that you're interested in as well, and you'll get it for a song. Anyway, this loco is DCC ready, so it's got no sound or special features like that. It's just a raw locomotive, so I'm looking forward to seeing what this is like. Quite expensive, of course, even at the Train World price, really, so reasonably high expectations for this. I have to say the box seems pretty heavy, so I'm hoping for a good amount of metalwork. Let's see if I get that. Let's get started. So as I say, this is a Mikado locomotive, which means it's got the 282 wheel configuration. And here in the UK, that's actually pretty rare. In fact, I can only think of one tender engine that's actually got that wheel configuration over here in the UK. And if you can think of any, pop them down in the comments, and we'll see if we're thinking of the same one. Anyway, let me show you the end of the box. So the version I've got is item number 54404. It is the HO scale 282 USRA light loco, DCC ready, and it is in the Western Pacific livery, and it's number 302. And that's really all there is to see on the box. We've got no specs or anything like that this time, so I guess we'll get straight in and see what's involved. So, opening up, let's see what we get. We've got the loco in the sleeve as usual. Let's get that. And then we've got the usual array of paperwork. Ah, look at this. Yes, it's another flyer advertising a 320-page full-colour combined Bachmann and Williams catalogue, 6.5 inch by 8.5 inch digest size. Now, I personally really enjoy these. They've all got different colours and little pictures you can look at, and I save each one of them that I get and put them into a little file that I can look back at from time to time. Oh, and the thing about my file is nothing's allowed in it unless it's torn into absolute pieces, so excuse me. Williams catalogue. Right, now that's taken care of, let's take a look at the actual instructions. So here we go, this is for the HO282 USRA Light. Smoke unit, I don't think that's applicable. Braking period, troubleshooting, I think that's all quite generic. So opening this up, wow, now that's what I call an exploded diagram. So we've got, I guess, the upper body and all of its details at the top here. Yeah, looks like a reasonably well detailed model. We'll take a look at the details later on. And then down below we've got the chassis, and it does look as though there are some good features on this. We've got a chunky looking motor with a flywheel and standard wiper pickups as well, suggesting this is a fairly standard chassis design. Again, we'll take a look at the quality of the chassis later on. And then on the back, we've got exploded diagrams for the different tenders. I think mine's got the medium tender, but there are obviously two other different tenders that you can possibly get with this loco. So that's all pretty interesting. And I don't think the rest of this stuff pertains to much, so let's see what we get with this. Any accessories? Yeah, no accessories whatsoever. So everything is pre-fitted with this one, which is good, I suppose. Okay, what's the finish like? Yeah, it's all right, I would say. I think we've seen slightly more luxurious finishes on some Bachmann locos. Yeah, it's definitely not looking quite as satin on the boiler as some. And is it die cast? No, the body's not die cast, but I've got some hopes that the model will be pretty heavy because the box certainly felt it. Right, let's lift this up. We've got something loose there. Ooh, yeah, that pipe works a bit loose on that. I'll have to be careful with that because it's right where your fingers want to go. But here it is, the USRA Mikado. And yeah, the weight really doesn't feel too bad. Most of the weight is in the loco, which is good. That's what you'd expect. Although things like the running plate and the body, yeah, those are plastic. So it's obviously just a chunky metal chassis in here that is responsible for most of the weight. In terms of detail, yeah, I can see already that there are some nice features on here, although it doesn't look to be the most complex loco in the world, so I'm very glad that I didn't pay something insane like £300 for this. 129 seems, I would say, about right at a glance, but we'll take a much closer look at this in just a second and talk about some of its features. Anyway, for now, a little bit of background on these locos in real life. These light Mikados were a very numerous class of steam locomotive built between 1918 and 1929. Over 600 were built originally by the USRA, or the United States Railroad Administration, during the First World War. The USRA was a nationalized railroad system in the United States that only operated for a relatively short time, and it was wound down shortly after the First World War in 1920. This locomotive was one of the USRA's standard designs, and it proved to be both popular and successful. So much so that 641 more examples were built after the USRA ceased to operate. They ran on 2 cylinders and were driven by Walschaerts valve gear, and they were pretty quick for the time too, with a top speed of 59 miles per hour. The vast majority of the class were withdrawn long ago with the advent of the diesel locomotive, although 9 of them remain under preservation. 6 are the original USRA version, while 3 are the later copies. So there it is, up close and personal for you, Bachmann's USRA Mikado. And yeah, generally I think this model looks great. It's well presented, it does indeed have some nice detailing, as we'll see, and generally I think it's got some good presence to it. However, compared with the last Bachmann steam loco I looked at, that was the Hudson, the quality of this loco is noticeably not quite as good. Now, the Hudson had a die-cast body, and the finish, I think, looking at this footage, is noticeably better than the plastic body on this loco. This one doesn't look bad by any means, but if you compare them, yeah, I think you can tell the difference. The weight is also dramatically different, so this weighs in at 427 grams, which is over 300 grams lighter than the Hudson. Now, obviously, the Hudson was extremely heavy, and it's also a larger loco than this, but even accounting for the difference in size, 300 grams lighter is quite dramatic. So a pity about the lack of die-cast body, but I do think that is reflected in the price I paid. The other area where the quality could be better is in the pipework. As I've already noted, this hasn't been fitted correctly, so it's kind of hanging off the model. And this doesn't seem to be a one-off issue either, because the pipework round on the other side has exactly the same issue. It appears to be loose. There's also a slight issue with the accuracy of the way some of the printed details have been applied, but these are not major problems. So let's talk about the decoration. It's a relatively simple loco, obviously, in terms of decoration, but what is here has been done fairly well. So the firebox has been picked out, that looks fine, and we've also got the running number printed onto the side of the cab. The ends of the cylinders have been picked out as well, and that really helps those to stand out. And then, of course, as usual on this kind of livery, the smoke box has been picked out into the metallic colour as well. And we've got things like the little painted bell here, which is a separately fitted part, and that's even able to turn slightly, which is good to see. And then the lamp on the front, which has the number printed onto the side and front of it. Quite a pleasing little part, that one. Let's start from the bottom then and talk about the level of detail. So the wheels look fine. These are the usual cast Bachmann wheels by the looks of things. And the coupling rods are, you know, they're chunky, but that's prototypical. They actually look fairly realistic, I would say. There's also a pleasing amount of daylight underneath the boiler, which makes it look pretty realistic. And the springs above each wheel have been fully represented too, which looks good. Some of the pipework we've seen is separately fitted, other pipework is just a part of the moulding, but this looks fine because it's been picked out. Got quite a few different separate parts across the loco body, including the handrails, which do appear to be wire, so that looks good. The smoke box door also has wire handrails on it, which look good. It's also got separately fitted lamps as well, which I don't think I've seen before. These small ones I don't think will work, but they are at least nice, fine little parts. Here's a look around the cowcatcher area where we've got the uncoupling mechanism, which as usual is a separate movable piece. And we do have a front knuckle coupler on this loco, which is your usual Bachmann type that is made of plastic. Up on top of the loco we've got the whistle, which unfortunately is just plastic, and it's fairly badly painted as well, which is a shame. And that contrasts quite a lot with the very high quality safety valves here, which are turned metal, and you can see the difference in the finish on those parts as a result. We've got a few other details on the top of the loco, like the generator for the lights, and then the cab area has these glazed windows which look absolutely fine, although unfortunately there is really not much cab detail on the inside. Most American locos are like this. I think here in the UK almost every model these days has some decoration in the cab, and most models are pretty impressive. Not so much with American models, which I think is a shame. The loco's trucks are free to pivot, as you can see, and I particularly like this one at the back. It's a really interesting design. The axle box protrudes quite a way out from the wheel, and then you've got the spring, which is just kind of mounted on top of the pony. Yeah, it's a very interesting thing to look at. The other thing to mention is the coupling between the loco and the tender. Now, believe it or not, I've got these close coupled here. This is the closest you can couple them with the drawbar provided, and as you can see, it's not dreadfully close. The other thing is these wires are extremely ungainly. In fact, they are basically touching the sleepers there. And that's made even worse by the fact that I've got this close coupled, because it bunches the wires up and pushes them further down. So not a very elegant loco to tender coupling, and there really is a huge fistful of wires there. Let's take a look at the tender then, which is similar in its quality and level of detail. So plastic construction, not really much of a problem with that. The Western Pacific logo on the side of the tender is a nice little print, and there's plenty of moulded detail on the side of the tender, with all of the riveting looking pretty good. The tender chassis doesn't seem to be 100% straight. I don't know whether that's my eyes, but yeah, it does seem to be warping away from the tender body towards the front there. The bogies look good as well. We've got metal wheels on here and a fair amount of detail on the bogies. We'll talk more about the wheels and pickups later on. The tender's also got a number of separate details, including these wire handrails, which have been nicely applied. We've got a lamp protruding from the top of the tender at the back. Hopefully these will be functional. And then we've got the ladder on the back too, which looks like a fairly detailed one. And then we've got the coal load up in the top, which doesn't seem to be removable, at least not the coal piece by itself, but the moulded detail in the coal there actually looks pretty good, I would say. So there you have it. That is a look over the level of detail on this. I don't think it's mind-blowing in any way, but it is well presented. There's no visible glue actually, and that's possibly because not enough glue was used to secure some of the parts. But elsewhere on the model that has worked pretty well, because there's no smearing or visible smudges of glue anywhere, which is good to see. Pity about the plastic construction, but the price I paid does reflect that. Although if you're paying a lot more money, like you would if you bought this from a UK retailer, I would actually be pretty disappointed in that. But anyway, there you go, a fair loco, I would say. But I want to know how this runs, and I also want to know what the mechanism is like in this. Obviously, it's not a cheap model, so if it's got a cheap mechanism, again, I will find that pretty disappointing. So let's get it down onto the track and let's find out. So there it is down onto the track, looking quite imposing actually, I think. Anyway, I've already filmed the initial performance test and running in, and I'll show you how all of that went in just a second. After that though, I did a bit of a disassembly just to take a look at the mechanism, and I'm going to present that for you now. So let's start by talking about the pickups. As you can see here, half of the tender wheels pick up power through the axles. The front bogie does one of the rails with 2 wheels, and then the rear bogie uses 2 wheels to pick up power from the other rail. We'll talk about the loco pickups in just a second because they're pretty much invisible from outside of the model. Here's a look at that drawbar, which I don't think is very good. It's insecure, it's not screwed in place, and the close coupling option isn't very close. And these wires are just insane. There's so many of them and they haven't been managed particularly well, to the point where, like I said earlier on, yeah, they are indeed dragging on the sleepers. However, the base keeper plate is fully removable, so if you pull these screws out, you can take the base keeper off very easily, where you can see we do have wiper pickups here going to each of the wheels. In terms of the drive, it's just one axle driven with a gear, as you can see here, although there are no proper separate bearings on the driving axles, which I think is really poor because those brass bearings really do reduce the drag of the chassis, and you will see how much the loco struggles in just a second when I run it. If I pull one of the axles out, you can also see that these sit into square slots in the chassis, which again doesn't scream quality. Body removal is reasonably easy, but the instructions don't really detail how to do this, so I'll show you now. There's a front screw around the front pony, which you can get to quite easily. There are 2 rear screws, which are a bit trickier to get to, so for that I did remove the rear pony truck, and then I disconnected the electrical plug as well, just so that it wasn't in the way. The body is now free to come off, although there are some details around the smoke box which need popping out of place before you can do that. Also bear in mind there are wires connecting the body to the chassis for the lighting, so just be careful not to pull those. And finally we can see some metal. This is the chassis, and as you can see it's a very dense chassis which is fully die cast, and it packs the body really quite well. Here is the motor, which I believe is a 5-pole motor, and you can't see it, but there is a flywheel on here too, so that's all pretty good. And then for accessing the DCC socket, you have to remove the tender body, which is held on with clips at the back and then 1 screw around the area of the front bogie. So pulling the body off reveals that this has got an 8-pin socket inside, which is a little bit dated, I suppose, by modern standards, but still plenty of decoders available with 8-pin plugs on them, although there is no pre-fitted speaker, so if you want sound, you do have to provide your own, which I think is a shame given the full price. And then the back-to-back gauge comes in between 14.2 and 14.4 millimeters, so not as consistent as some, but still all of them are close to the standard. So overall I would say the mechanism is actually pretty good quality. It is let down by a couple of major things, that being the bearings and the drawbar. Apart from that though, the rest of it is competent at the very least, and with things like the motor, they seem to be really good quality. So a mixed bag on mechanism, but let's now talk about performance, and for that I'm going to go back in time and show you how that first test went. Alright, time to give this its first ever run then. Now bear in mind I have not let this run in yet, this will be its first ever run. However, I will let it do the full run in before I finish the review and give a final thought on the performance. But does it work at all? Let's find out. Forwards direction, and here comes a little bit of power. Here goes. Okay. Well, it's at full power and nothing's happening. The light on the front is on, which shows that the loco's got power. But it is not running. Interesting. Reverse. Oh man. Well, that's not good. I'll have a little investigation then and see if there's anything obviously the matter. Alright, well, one of the first things I did was wiggle the wires between the loco and tender, and the plug came straight out of the socket. So I'm hoping it was just a loose plug and that's all. I've put it back in. Does it work now? I can hear something. Yeah, that's at 60% power. Good grief. But it is moving now. Yeah, that is 60. Let's run at 50. That's it running at 50% power on the controller. Well, the gearing's either excellent or we've got a slight issue with this thing. Okay, well, maybe it will need a good warm-up. That's 70% power. Is there much torque there? I don't think I need to test this. Oh, well, actually there is. I'm glad I did then. So why is it so slow? Full speed. Well, that's really odd. It goes at kind of a normal pace at full power. However, that is 50 now. And that's faster I think, than it was at 50 a second ago. So I think this one's really just going to need running in. Yeah, that's crazy. Seems to be coming to life though. So, I mean, you guys have seen the mechanism portion at this point, so I make a prediction that this thing doesn't have proper bearings, and it's probably not going to be the best chassis in the world. I could be wrong, but yeah, it's not usual to see a loco so sleepy when it's brand new like this, straight out of the box. Okay. Well, I think it just needs a really good run in, which I will do. Anyway, let's just have a quick look and see what the crawl is like. I mean, it was crawling at half power, so it should be pretty good. In fact, let's pull in a bit closer to the middle. Here we go. I'm going to turn it up very slowly. Yeah, the crawl is fantastic. Yeah, that's actually really smooth. So I don't know, maybe this chassis is wonderful. I don't know. I'm really looking forward to seeing it. Smooth acceleration. Yeah. Okay, so despite my initial skepticism, running in could really improve this one. How it's going to do over the second radius, I don't know. But then the torque didn't seem too bad, did it? So it's just weird at the moment. It's weird. I'm going to run it in and then we'll take it from there after it's warmed up and bedded in. So here we go. I don't know if I'll do it at 50. Yeah, I think I will because it's faster now. Let's see how it gets on. Okay, well, it's on the 4th radius curve now. Bachmann say this runs best on 18-inch curves, 18-inch radius that is, which is somewhere between 2nd and 3rd radius, closer to 2nd, so it should be okay on 2nd. And it has done that without derailing. However, it did slow down quite dramatically. And it's still slowing down dramatically even on the straight. So I think it's fair to say that running in for this loco has to achieve a lot if this is going to get a good performance score. The crawl was excellent, the torque doesn't seem terrible, but it's not running at a particularly smooth or consistent speed, and the speed itself doesn't seem to be quite right, does it? So I'll give this 30 minutes, I'll keep a close eye on it, 30 minutes backwards after that, and then we'll come back, we'll see how it holds, and we'll also see how the performance has changed. So certainly an interesting performance section so far. Let's see how it unfolds. Alright folks, I am back, and I have to say I'm very, very surprised because running in has entirely transformed this loco. That is not what I expected. This started off so badly. It was dead to start with because the plug was loose. Then it was incredibly sluggish. But now I would say it is a spot-on performer. It didn't go completely without issues. It did derail a couple of times over the points, which is weird. And I discovered what was happening was, of course, the wires dangling down from the tender connection, catching on the rails of the points and causing it to hesitate and sometimes derail. And the little bumps on these power tracks, or really anything that is between the rails of your track, are going to cause that. So to fix the issue, I actually coupled the loco and tender on the more distant coupling option rather than the close one, which has stretched the wires out a little bit so that they're now not touching the track. So that's not great, but apart from that, everything is much, much better now. In fact, let me show you the 50% speed test again. Look at this. That's at half power, and it's about, what, 3 or 4 times faster than it was before? So now I would say the speed is a lot more like what I would expect. Yeah, it's absolutely fine. And I've noticed also that even at the slower speeds, it's not really slowing down on the curves now either. And if I do a quick torque test, you can see, yeah, there does seem to be a good amount of power there. So That motor, I would say, is obviously a good one. It's overcoming the drag from the lack of bearings pretty well too. Alright, well the crawl was great, but how is it now that the loco's running? Let's try that again. I'm going to ease it up very slowly. I'm expecting it to start... Oh, yeah, it certainly did. I was going to say, I'm expecting it to start at a lower setting now. And it is. There it goes, it's moving. Gosh. So slowly, but it is moving. So it's very controllable. And a smooth acceleration? Sure. Yeah. Brilliantly. Now let's try it in reverse. Yeah, it can do it in reverse too. So that is absolutely marvellous. Now we do have working lamps on this, on both the front and the back, although they are not directional, so all lamps light at all times, regardless of the direction of travel. Whether that would be different on DCC, I'm not sure. But here on analog, that's how it works. But yeah, performance, absolutely spot on. And the pulling power is surprisingly good as well, given the plastic construction on the body. So thanks to its heavy die-cast chassis, the pulling force is 0.54 newtons, which is around 32 coaches on straight and level track. I think that is also helped quite a bit by the decent torque in this mechanism, which is great. So to test the loco's haulage, I've set up a load of different hoppers, which all match this loco in their black liveries. So with that, let's back up and let's see how the couplings get on. Here we go. Oh, I love how smoothly you can control this. Okay, let's do this slowly. You can, yeah, this is one of those that you can make really painfully slow. You can make it take all day if you want. Did it work? Yeah, it's got it. Okay, so with that then, let's try the USRA 282 with a bit of a load. Here she goes. Let's do this gradually again, because it really is enjoyable seeing a loco start so realistically. On analog too. That's what I'm talking about. So when people ask, what does a loco need to do to impress you in terms of performance? Well, look at this one. It's pretty darn good. And as you can see, we've got quite a few different wagons here. And don't forget to spot which other locos you can see in the sidings. I have put an odd one out there today as well, so see if you can see what that is. On the middle line though, I'll give you this one. This is one I've not run for ages. It's also made by Bachmann, but this is the Russian Decapod, which is an interesting loco with a lot of driving wheels. Yeah, I quite like that, with a bit of a freight train, of course. And then on the inside line, we've got the American Dock Tank, which is an American design, but they actually ran in the UK, or at least some of them did. So that's always an interesting one, and that too has a bit of a freight train. So with that, let's check in with the Mikado and see how it's hauling that load. Okay, so here we go. Fourth radius, definitely no real slowing down that I can see. And into the second, yeah, it's maintaining a pretty constant speed there. I think it may have slowed down a tiny bit, but considering the weight of some of these wagons, it's actually done that marvellously. So I really do think this is possibly the best running in success story I've ever seen. I can't remember seeing another loco ever being turned around so dramatically just by an hour's running or so. Yeah, really impressed with that, and the performance as a result is now spot on. Really good. In fact, compared with some of the other Bachmann steamers from the States that I've got, this is well up there. It's got to be one of the best, I think. So very good on performance. The level of detail is great as well. Obviously there are things that could be better, like the lack of painted cab and perhaps the slight over-reliance on moulded detail, but from this kind of distance it all comes together to look fantastic, and I like the lighting as well. So yeah, it's a decent loco. It's definitely not worth the full price, particularly those UK RRPs that I saw. Yeah, that's a little bit crazy for what you get, but for what I paid, 130 odd pounds, I have to say I'm pretty satisfied. It seems to be worth the money, and it seems to work very well. So there you have it. If you can find one for a good price, this is a loco I think I could recommend. Alright, let's do some ratings then for the Bachmann USRA 282. The level of detail is kind of middle of the road for me. I've given it 3.5 stars. On the plus side, the decoration is absolutely fine, not particularly complex, but what is there is done well. It's got lights, which is a good feature as well, and quite a few separate parts as well, including some of the pipe work, which looks pretty impressive, as is the moulded detail. On the downside though, the cab is pretty basic, none of it's painted, and there's quite a few plasticky looking parts such as the bell and the whistle, which don't look the best, so I've knocked it down a 1.5 stars for that. Performance though is a 5-star, and I'm really surprised to be giving it that score. Like I say, wasn't good to start with, but running in really improved this, to the point where I cannot fault it. It's nice and smooth, it does a great crawl. The torque, of all things, is absolutely fine. It's handling a modest freight train around reasonably tight curves without slowing down. So 5-star performance, really impressive. The pulling power again is marvellous, 0.54 newtons or 32 coaches on straight and level track. That is more than a Hornby P2. Yeah, it's pretty powerful to say that it has a plastic body, although like I say, the chassis in there is very heavy. And that brings us on to the mechanism, which on the whole has some really good aspects to it, but there are 1 or 2 things that spoil it. So it's got plenty of pickups, it's got 6 per rail, that's absolutely fine. It's got an accessible DCC socket, so it's easy to chip if you want to. It's serviceable, you can get easy access to the axles and the inside of the body. 5-pole motor with a flywheel too. On the downside though, it doesn't have any proper bearings on the axles, and the axles sit into square slots cut into the metal chassis. I don't like that feature, and the drawbar is pretty poor as well. It's insecure, not screwed, and it's got those horrible wires which touch the track in some cases. So a couple of stars off for that, otherwise not a bad mechanism. The quality, I think, is the weakest aspect of the model. It has been assembled reasonably well with no visible glue, although it does have a plastic body. The warping on the tender chassis really isn't a good look. It's also got some loose parts and details such as the pipework on both sides, and because of the plastic body, I suppose, the finish isn't as good as we've seen on other models from Bachmann, so I think the best I can do is 2-star. Taking all that into account then, I've given the value 2.5 star. I think Bachmann's full price over here in the UK of £299.25 is really quite ridiculous for this. That RRP is way higher than any UK steam locomotive I can think of, and yet this is far poorer in its quality and features than quite a lot of them. The retailer price in the UK isn't really much better at £238, although the American retailer price is perfectly reasonable, I think, at about £129 or $160. So taking all of this into account, I've given it a middle of the road value rating. Don't pay too much for this thing because it's not worth it. However, good prices are out there. Overall then, that is 6.74 out of 10, or a grade of E, which might seem a little bit harsh, but I do think it's deserved given the relatively low quality of this model. Into the logbook it goes then, where it is 13th place above the Haulage Class 14 and below the Bully Booster, so very middle of the road. If you can pick it up for the right price, it's definitely not a bad model. Alright then folks, well thank you so much for tuning in for yet another review. I hope you enjoyed this one. I think I'm making some pretty good progress on reviewing Bachmann's USA steam range. I don't know how many more there are. I know there are some, and if you've got any recommendations on what you'd like to see next or soon, please do let me know. I'm going to keep going until I've covered the range. But yeah, this one's not too bad. I think it could have been better, obviously, and the bearings, that spoils it a little bit. But otherwise, it is quite an enjoyable model, and it's actually one that I'd quite like to chip and get going with some sound, maybe some Bluetooth as well, because I think that would really elevate it. But for now, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for watching. Do comment down below, like I say, and let me know what you think about this. But I think we'll leave it there for now, and I'll catch you again very, very soon for another review. Alright then, thanks for watching. You take care. Cheers, everybody.